Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Paul Kirst. I'm hosting the Spiral Dynamics Integral Live Saturday Zoom get together. Today we're going to have a presentation by Dr. William Argus, who is going to do share a presentation on how the problems with leadership, why leadership is so hard. And he'll be sharing some insights into leadership and spiral dynamics and integral philosophy. So I will turn it over to Dr. Argus and let him go from there.
Well, thank you, Paul. Can everybody see this? I have two screens going here.
Yes.
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about polarities. And I want to, first of all, give a shout out to Veronica, who made some of these diagrams for me that I'm using today. Some of you know, a few months ago, I gave a talk here about polarity management and why I thought it was so important. And this is sort of a labor of love for me. With regard to the integral model, you know that there are 5 steps of the Aqual model: all quadrants, all lines, all levels, all types, and all states. This picture only describes the 3, the quadrants, the lines, and the levels. I don't know much about states, but I think the types are often left out. And they are the polarities. And I think that they're very important in our lives. And what I'm going to argue today is that the polarities and the interiors are what we really need to pay attention to. On the call today is Carolyn Fisher, and she is my comrade in this talk that we're going to be giving to the Academy about leadership and polarities. And I think that, again, this is sort of a labor of love. I think that this is very, very important. And but we can't talk about interiors very easily. So I wanted to start off with leadership, because it's leadership that if we're going to have diversity, equity, and inclusion and address the other polarities, it's going to start with the leaders. So in this conference, I want to start with asking the group in this workshop, actually, that we're going to have on leadership. We're going to ask people, what is leadership? And hopefully they will come up with things like this, that leaders motivate people, they organize folks, they're forward thinking, they're planners, they settle conflicts, they set boundaries but are flexible, they balance individuals versus team, and they set standards. And that's nice, that's sort of obvious. And people that are in this conference are going to wonder about how they do this stuff. So, I mean, this is what leaders do. You can talk about that, but the question really is, how do leaders do this stuff? These things are actions, right? But there has to be an action logic behind it. So we know this is what they do, but how do they do it? And how do they think? And so the first example that I would bring up with them is to just talk about the action logic of throwing a ball. So if I have a ball and I want to throw it to someone, I have a memory of how hard I think I need to throw it, and I throw the ball to you, and let's say that it comes up short. So it comes up short, and then I think to myself, well, I have to throw it harder. So I throw it harder, and I'm still short. So then there's a logic here where I have to say, well, do I put more wrist action into this? Do I swing harder? Do I step into it? Do I throw it overhand? So there's always a logic behind your action. So if leaders do these actions, what's the logic behind what they're doing? Okay, I mean, that's the first point. And then share my screen again here to talk about the next topic would be Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek is a very popular guy. He did this TED talk several years ago. He's had 60 million hits on this. He's become a very popular leader. And he asks, his main question is, when you want to talk about leadership, you start with why. So the first question is, what do you do? And that's the objective third person thing. I'm a doctor. I see patients, I do surgery, I go to the hospital. But how do I do that? That's the second question. How do I be a doctor? And so that's where we start to differentiate, because some doctors do things one way, others do others. So we don't always do things the same way. But the real question is, why? Why am I a doctor? Or why do I get out of bed in the morning? Why do I go to work? Is it for the money? Is it for the social part? Is it the prestige? Is it helping people? What is it? And so when we talk about leadership, again, we have all these things that leaders do. But the question is about the interiors of why do they do them? And you begin to get into the subjective versus the objective. Now, I'm a doctor, and most of us deal with the objective. It's not just doctors. We look at our surgical results. We might look at patient satisfaction surveys, overhead costs, revenue sources, all sorts of objective things that we might look at. And we prefer those things. If we're writing a paper, we have to talk about our objective findings. We can't just say, I feel this, or I think one surgical result is better than another. I have to have objective proof. And the subjective are often something simple like a chief complaint, which is not very reliable. And also feelings and emotions. How do you feel today? Well, those things can vary from day to day, and so they're not very reliable. And it's why I think we tend to prefer the objective. But in the subjective is the why. Why do we do things? And this brings up issues of meaning and purpose in our life. Again, why do we do things? So again, we have exteriors. This is what they do, but how do they do it? What action logics do they have to get these results? How do they make sense of the world? And how do they deal with fundamental tensions? I stole this term, fundamental tensions, from Adam Grant. And I'll tell you a little bit more about him later, but he's a professor at Wharton Business College, and he also is a TED rock star now. He has a podcast about organizational psychology. So the next step is to talk about some of these fundamental tensions, and one of them is stability versus change. And talk a little bit, I think I'll stop sharing here for a minute. So Carolyn and I are going to be doing this talk, and I'd like to begin by talking about just a narrative that I favor stability and that she favors change. And so in our narrative, we are business partners. We're both doctors in the same group, and we've had a very, very successful practice for many years. But sometimes she sort of drives me crazy because she's always trying to change things. And then she can come back and say that, well, I drive her crazy because I'm a stick in the mud and I never want to change anything, and we'd still be using stone tablets if it were up to me. And then we can go back and forth as I talk about the benefits of stability. We have traditional values that we support. We get great results. Why do we need to change anything? But then she can say that we need new ideas. We need to have progress. We need to buy new instruments. We need to stay current. I can say, well, that's all fine and dandy, but all that stuff causes stress, and the employees get freaked out and chaos ensues. And what we can say is that how do we resolve this? I mean, we both have good ideas, but who's right and who's wrong? And of course, with the polarities, it's not that one is right and one is wrong, that both people are right. So bring up the idea of a polarity map and how we map out this change versus stability. So we have stability on one pole and we have change on the other. And I favor stability, and the benefits of that are we're efficient. Everybody seems to have job security. We have tradition, we have good patient care. We know what's going on. And on the other side, because we're competitive and we're always growing, we develop new skills, we are competitive, and there's overall progress. So there's no need to choose between these two. We obviously need to do both. But if we focus too much on efficiency and tradition, we get stagnation, we can fall behind and not be competitive anymore. And there are no new ideas. And if we focus too much on the new skills, competitive change side, we wind up with inefficiency and some job insecurity and overall chaos. And so the main mechanism here is to try to stay up here in these two sides. So as long as we can be both efficient and have new skills and be competitive, we can thrive. But if we dip down here and get into a vicious cycle of just stagnating and being inefficient, our corporation will struggle. And so this is the basic structure of a polarity map, where you have two goods. There are two competing goods that need to be addressed. But if you focus too much on one side, you can wind up in some negative territory. If you recognize that quickly, you can stay up on top. The two other tensions I just wanted to bring up. One fundamental tension is about conditional respect versus unconditional respect. So this is probably best understood with like raising children, with conditional love versus unconditional love. When your children come home from school, you don't need to see the report card to know whether you love them or not. It's just a basic right that they have. But on the other hand, you do need to raise a responsible citizen. And so there needs to be some consequences for bad behavior. So there's both conditional respect and unconditional respect. Now, in the family, there's much more unconditional love, but in the corporation or job, we focus a great deal on conditional respect, performance, and values. And one of the best examples I know of to show that what happens when you neglect this is this picture from the 1968 Memphis sanitation workers strike. Notice that he's demanding respect and dignity. If he was asking for conditional respect, he'd be asking for 50 cents more per hour, but he's not. He's asking for just fundamental respect in life. So in our polarity maps, we can say that we have conditional respect and unconditional respect. And the conditional is performance-based. It's on metrics. This is largely what we focus on when we run our businesses. But we have to be careful to not neglect the unconditional respect, the human dignity. And if we look at this a little bit more, we can say that conditional respect for ourself, self-respect, is pride in our work. That's a good thing. And when others respect us for our work, that is recognition. So both of those are conditional. On the unconditional side, we have personal dignity. That's just self-respect for ourselves. And when others recognize our personal dignity, it's a recognition of our humanity. In a company, when we fail to give adequate conditional respect, people start feeling like a number, or they're only valued for what they do for the company. This leads to terrible morale, of course. But if we just give too much unconditional respect, then we have a lack of accountability and there aren't any standards. In a similar way, there's a fundamental tension of the patient satisfaction versus employee satisfaction. You've all heard the statement, the customer is always right. Well, we do have to take care of the customer. In my case, we have to take care of the patient. But to see how silly that statement, the customer is always right, is just imagine changing that noun to, the boss is always right, or your parent is always right, your minister is always right. I mean, it's just silly that it's overemphasizing one pole at the expense of another. So we have patient satisfaction and employee satisfaction. And again, employee versus patient. If we take care of our employees, their staff will be engaged, they'll have ample resources to do their jobs, and there'll be staff development with continuing education. And if we favor the patient, they'll have individualized care, quality care, the family's engaged, and the patients will be satisfied. We need to do both. This is not a question of just doing one or the other. You have to do both of these in life. This is the integral type that we're talking about. You have to do both. But if you focus too much on the employees, then there'll be loss of patient input, there'll be poorer outcomes, and there'll be more patient complaints. And if you focus too much on the patient side, the staff will start to not be valued, and there won't be adequate staff development, and you'll wind up with a toxic environment. So I hope this sort of makes sense here. But to take it to the next level, we want to try to say that we've identified three polarities: stability versus change, conditional respect versus unconditional respect, and patient satisfaction. It shouldn't be that hard to convince all of you that these things are real and that effective leaders need to navigate both. But again, this is a logical action plan. This is what leaders do. They deal with this stuff. But the question is, how do they deal with this stuff? How do you manage this? What are the steps that leaders take, and what's the logic behind what they do in order to make this thing work? And for that, I want to go back again a little bit, talk about the values that we have. Again, if we go back to our narrative where Caroline is favoring change and I favor stability, the question is why? Why do I favor stability? Why does she favor change? And what is the mechanism for this thing? So if I favor stability, I can look at this diagram and I can say rationally, I know that we need new skills. We need to be competitive and we need to have progress. But there's something in me that fights this. And it probably has to do with a fear of chaos. So down here on this lower right side, there are things down here that bother me a great deal. And they bother me not only logically, but probably emotionally. That somewhere in my past, I had difficulty. Something happened. There was a chaotic time in my life. Perhaps the family business had troubles, or there was divorces or something. Chaos bothered me. And so as we move over here into progress, my radar for chaos is going to be up there. And similarly for Caroline, there's probably something in her past where she missed an opportunity to do something. And so she's always worried about falling behind. And this is the dynamic that runs these polarities, that uh, that my fear of chaos wants me to favor job security and tradition and stability. And her fear of missing out is going to lead her to want to always be changing things. And the reason that we in this narrative have such a successful business is that as she moves to these things, these new ideas, she helps me overcome my insecurities here and helps me get along. And similarly, when we start to get into certain areas, I help her through with things. And so we can talk a little bit about values and fears. I hope this is sort of making some sense to you guys as I do this. I can't see everybody, but values and fears are what we need to consider. What are the driving values that why do I go to work in the morning? Why do I get up and do things? What do I value? And obviously, if I value it a lot, then I will fear the loss of it. So if I value stability, I will fear the loss of it and fear chaos. So what is it that drives leaders to do things? And what I'd like to do now is have a little breakout session, if possible, where we go into some small groups and everyone can mention something that they value. And it's something that just it's part of you. It's what you value. And I can go first to give you a nice idea of what I'm talking about here, is that I value happy patients. Okay. That's something that I want. I really enjoy coming in. This morning, I saw 8 post-op patients. They were all very happy. They could see better. I really like that. Okay. That's fun. That makes me happy. But if I focus too much on having happy patients, then I will fear trying new things. And I will fail to adopt new procedures and new techniques because I only want to have happy patients. That I have to be willing to go into a room and try something new and risk having a patient not be happy with me. Now, I can logically say that, but if I don't acknowledge it and come to grips with it, then I will begin to stagnate. And I think what I'm trying to show in this workshop is not only are these polarities real, and you can look at them logically, but we need to be able to feel our own bias and what we value and see the negatives of it. And maybe we can go into a little breakout session and you can talk about something that you value. And then we can think about what happens if you value it too much. What are those negatives?
How many people in each group?
Well, I'd probably just do 2 or 3.
Okay.
Bill made a request that I place Patrick and Caroline in a group with you, Bet.
Okay. Sounds good.
And so I'm gonna now, Bill, are you gonna want to resume your presentation after the breakouts?
Just a little bit, yes.
Okay, then I will stop the recording, and I'll start it up again afterwards. I'll set up 4 rooms with roughly 3 people in it each. Give me a few minutes to kind of do a little shuffling around, but
Okay, while you're doing that, I'm gonna get some clarification from Bill so that we all make sure we don't spin our wheels answering unrelated questions. So let's say I value sustainability